They laughed when I couldn't pay rent, until I became their landlord. The eviction notice was still warm in my hands when I made the phone call that would change everything. My own family had watched me lose my home, and laughed. They had no idea I'd just inherited something that would make their smug faces crumble. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, and stick around to hear how I turned their cruelest moment into my greatest victory. My name is Thea Blackwood. I am 32 years old, and I live, or rather, lived, in East Briar, a city where old money whispers through tree-lined streets and new money shouts from glass towers. For most of my life, I existed somewhere in between those worlds, never quite belonging to either. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in March. I was sitting in my tiny studio apartment, the one with the leaky faucet and the radiator that clanged like a ghost in chains, staring at the eviction notice that had been slipped under my door. 72 hours. That's all I had left before the sheriff would come with his clipboard and his polite, practiced sympathy. I should have been panicking. Should have been making frantic calls, begging for extensions, scraping together dignity along with loose change. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. A strange, crystalline calm. You see, I'd been expecting this call from Harrison and Associates for weeks. What I hadn't expected was what Mr. Harrison would tell me. "Miss Blackwood," his voice crackled through my phone, formal and distant. "I'm calling regarding the estate of your great-aunt Cordelia Blackwood. I apologize for the delay. We've been sorting through some rather complex holdings." Aunt Cordelia. I barely remembered her. A stern woman with silver hair who'd attended family gatherings like a specter, speaking little and observing much. She'd died 6 months ago, and I'd assumed, like everyone else, that her modest estate had been divided among the more prominent branches of the Blackwood family tree. "There appears to have been an oversight," Mr. Harrison continued. "Your great-aunt left specific instructions that a particular property be transferred to you, and you alone. The paperwork was misfiled, but we've now located it." I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of property? A residential building in Camden Point. 12 units. It's been professionally managed, generating substantial monthly income. "Miss Blackwood, you're now the owner of the Greystone Apartments." The world tilted. Camden Point was East Briar's most desirable neighborhood, where young professionals and established families paid premium rents for the privilege of saying they lived there. The Greystone Apartments, I knew the building. I'd walked past it countless times, admiring its Art Deco facade and perfectly manicured courtyard. "There must be some mistake," I whispered. "No mistake. Your great-aunt was quite specific. She left a letter for you as well. I can messenger it over this afternoon, along with the property documents." I hung up in a daze, staring at the eviction notice in my lap. 72 hours to vacate my studio apartment, but now I own 12 units, worth more than I'd ever dreamed possible. The irony wasn't lost on me. For months I'd been drowning financially. My freelance graphic design work had dried up when the economy tightened, and my family, my wealthy, successful, endlessly disappointing family, had watched me struggle with the detached interest of spectators at a particularly tedious sporting event. My stepmother Vivian had made her position clear at Christmas dinner. "Thea needs to learn responsibility," she'd announced to the assembled relatives, cutting her prime rib with surgical precision. "Bailing her out constantly won't help her grow up." Bailing me out, as if I'd ever asked them for a single penny. Half-brother Marcus had nodded sagely, his wife Catherine murmuring agreement. Both had inherited substantial trust funds at 25, never knowing what it felt like to choose between groceries and electricity. But somehow, my struggles were a character flaw rather than circumstances. "She's always been the artistic type," my father had said with that particular tone parents use when discussing a child's imaginary friend. Perhaps it's time she considered something more practical. as if creativity were a luxury I couldn't afford, rather than the thing that had sustained me through years of their casual dismissal. The messenger arrived at 4 o'clock sharp. A crisp manila envelope containing deed transfers, bank statements, and a letter written in Aunt Cordelia's precise handwriting. Dearest Thea, if you're reading this, then the vultures have already circled and found nothing to their taste. Good. I've watched this family for 87 years, and I've seen how they treat those who don't fit their narrow definition of success. You remind me of myself at your age, stubborn, creative, unwilling to compromise your integrity for comfort. The others see this as weakness. I see it as strength. The Greystone has been my sanctuary for 30 years. The tenants are good people, the building is well maintained, and the income is substantial. Use it wisely. Use it well. And perhaps use it to show our family that true worth isn't measured in stock portfolios and country club memberships. You were the only one who ever asked about my paintings when you visited as a child. The only one who seemed to understand that art matters, that beauty matters, that there are things more valuable than quarterly reports. Make them see you, Thea. Make them see who you really are. With love and faith in your future, Cordelia, I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the careful script. She'd seen me. After all these years of feeling invisible in my own family, someone had truly seen me. The financial documents told an even more interesting story. The Greystone generated nearly $30,000 monthly in rental income, with minimal maintenance costs and an impeccable occupancy rate. I wasn't just suddenly wealthy, I was suddenly powerful, and power, I was about to learn, was the only language my family understood. I didn't tell them immediately. Part of me wanted to savor the secret, to hold this knowledge close while I figured out what it meant. But mostly, I wanted to see if anything would change. If my family would reach out, offer help, show even the smallest glimmer of concern about my housing situation. They didn't. 3 days later, as I packed my meager belongings into cardboard boxes, my phone remained stubbornly silent. No calls from my father, checking to see if I'd found a place to stay. No texts from Marcus, offering their guest room. No surprise visits from Vivian, armed with practical advice and barely concealed superiority. I moved into a furnished rental across town, nothing fancy but clean and safe. Then I began my education as a landlord. The property management company, Silverline Property Group, had been handling the Greystone for years. They were efficient, professional, and utterly unsurprised by the ownership transfer. Miss Cordelia was very particular about her tenants, explained Janet Reyes, the lead property manager. She preferred long-term residents, professionals who treated the building with respect. We have a waiting list 3 months long. Walking through the Greystone felt surreal. The lobby was elegant but understated, all warm wood and subtle lighting. The apartments themselves were spacious and modern, with the kind of details that spoke of care and investment. Hardwood floors, updated kitchens, bathrooms with subway tile and vintage fixtures. This was what $30,000 a month looked like. This was what I now owned. The current lease agreements run through the end of the year, Janet continued as we toured the building. Most tenants will likely renew. They love living here. Though we did have one interesting inquiry last week. She paused, consulting her tablet. A couple looking for a 2-bedroom unit. The Hendersons, I believe. They mentioned they were family, friends of the previous owner. My blood chilled. What did they look like? Professional couple, early 30s. He was tall, dark hair, very polished. She was blonde, designer handbag. They seemed entitled, if I'm being honest. Kept talking about how they deserved priority consideration because of their family connection. Marcus and Catherine. They'd somehow learned about the building and assumed they could simply walk in and claim an apartment. The audacity shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. What did you tell them? Janet smiled. That we'd add them to the waiting list like everyone else. They weren't pleased. I bet they weren't. That evening, I made a decision that would have horrified my former self. I called my father. Thea, sweetheart. His voice carried that carefully, modulated warmth that had always felt rehearsed. How are you settling in? I hope you found someplace suitable. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that. I know things have been challenging lately. Financially, I mean. Well, we all go through difficult periods. It builds character. I was wondering if you might know of any opportunities. You have so many contacts in the business community. I could practically hear him straightening in his leather desk chair, pleased to be the magnanimous patriarch dispensing wisdom and connections. Of course, dear. What kind of work are you looking for? Actually, I was thinking more about real estate. Property management, maybe. I've always been good with people, and I think I'd enjoy working with tenants, maintaining buildings. Real estate? He sounded genuinely surprised. That's quite a departure from your artistic pursuits. Well, art doesn't pay the bills. No, it certainly doesn't. I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. You know, Marcus has been quite successful in commercial real estate. Perhaps he could offer some guidance. Perfect. That would be wonderful. Maybe we could all get together. I'd love to hear about his projects. I'll arrange something. Vivian will be thrilled. She's been hoping you'd consider a more practical career path. We hung up, and I immediately felt sick. The deception sat heavy in my stomach, but I reminded myself of every dismissive comment, every raised eyebrow, every moment they'd made me feel small and insignificant. They wanted to see practical. I'd show them practical. The family dinner was arranged for the following Sunday at my father's house in Millbrook Heights. The sprawling Tudor, where I'd spent awkward weekends after my parents' divorce, always feeling like a guest in what was supposed to be my second home. I arrived precisely on time, carrying a bottle of wine and a leather portfolio I'd purchased specifically for the occasion. Vivian greeted me at the door with air kisses and a brittle smile. Thea, darling, you look well. I love what you've done with your hair. I hadn't done anything with my hair, but Vivian's compliments were always slightly off target, as if she were commenting on a stranger she'd been briefed about but had never actually met. Marcus and Catherine were already in the living room, drinks in hand, discussing their latest vacation to some exclusive resort in the Caribbean. They looked exactly as Janet had described, polished, entitled, utterly convinced of their own importance. Thea. Marcus stood to embrace me, and for a moment I felt a pang of genuine affection. Whatever else he was, he'd been a decent brother during our childhood. Dad says you're thinking about real estate. That's fantastic. It seems like a smart move, I replied, settling into the wingback chair that had always been my spot during these family gatherings. I've been doing a lot of research. Research is good, Catherine chimed in, but experience is what really matters. Marcus has been involved in some incredible projects lately. Tell her about the Camden Point development. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. Camden Point? That's a lovely area. It really is, Marcus said, warming to his subject. We're looking at a major residential project there. High-end apartments, luxury amenities. The profit margins are incredible. Of course, the challenge is finding the right properties, Catherine added. So much of Camden Point is tied up in old family holdings. Ancient leases, stubborn owners who won't sell. It's frustrating. Have you looked at anything specific? I asked, sipping my wine. Marcus leaned forward conspiratorially. Actually, there's this one building, the Greystone Apartments. Beautiful Art Deco building, prime location, excellent rental income. It was owned by some elderly woman who died last year. The family is fighting over the estate, Catherine said with obvious relish. Classic old money drama. Multiple heirs, contested wills, Lawyers getting rich while the property sits in limbo. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching this conversation from outside my own body. That sounds complicated. It is, but that's what creates opportunities, Marcus said. When families are desperate to liquidate assets, they're willing to negotiate. We've put in a preliminary offer. Through intermediaries, of course, Catherine added. Can't let them know we're serious buyers or they'll jack up the price. Vivian appeared in the doorway. Dinner's ready. I hope everyone's hungry. Cook has outdone herself with the lamb. We moved to the dining room, where the conversation continued over perfectly prepared food I could barely taste. They talked about their offer on the Greystone as if it were already a done deal, discussing renovation plans and rental strategies with casual confidence. The current tenants will have to go, naturally, Catherine said, cutting her lamb with surgical precision. We'll want to completely rebrand the building, update the interiors, raise the rents, attract a more upscale clientele. What about the existing tenants? I asked. Some of them might have lived there for years. Marcus shrugged. That's business. You can't let sentiment interfere with profit margins. Besides, Vivian added, most renters in that area are transient anyway. Young, professionals, grad students. They'll find other places, as if decent, affordable housing in Camden Point grew on trees. The key is moving fast once the estate settles, Marcus continued. We've already identified the decision-makers in the family. A few well-placed conversations, maybe some pressure, about the carrying costs and property taxes, and they'll be eager to sell. I set down my fork carefully. What if they don't want to sell? Everyone has a price, Catherine said with absolute certainty. It's just a matter of finding it. What if the property isn't actually for sale? I pressed. What if the inheritance has already been settled? Marcus laughed. Trust me, I have good sources. The Blackwood estate is a mess. Could be tied up in probate for months. My father, who had been unusually quiet during the real estate discussion, finally spoke up. Marcus has done his homework, sweetheart. He doesn't make moves without proper research. Of course not, I murmured. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of small talk and family gossip. I nodded at appropriate moments, made interested sounds, and filed away every casual cruelty for future reference. As we moved back to the living room for coffee, Catherine pulled out her phone. Marcus, show Thea those photos from the Camden Point site visit. He scrolled through his gallery, stopping at a series of exterior shots of the Greystone. Beautiful building, isn't it? Look at that stonework, those original details. It'll be stunning once we modernize it. I stared at the photos of my building, and felt something shift inside me. A door closing, perhaps, or opening. I wasn't sure which. It's lovely, I said quietly. You should come see it sometime, Catherine suggested. Get a feel for the market. Marcus could show you around the neighborhood. I'd like that. As the evening wound down, I made my excuses and prepared to leave. My father walked me to the door, his hand warm on my shoulder. I'm proud of you for making this change, Thea. It shows maturity. Thank you. And don't worry about tonight. I know it can feel overwhelming, hearing Marcus talk about his projects. But everyone starts somewhere. Everyone starts somewhere. The patronizing kindness in his voice might have broken my heart once. Now it just made me tired. I drove home in silence, my mind spinning with plans and possibilities. They thought I was weak, thought I was desperate, thought I was so grateful for their attention that I'd swallow their condescension along with Vivian's perfectly prepared lamb. They were wrong. The next morning, I called Janet at Silverline Property Group. I want to review all pending applications and inquiries, I told her, especially any from people claiming family connections to the previous owner. Of course, there are actually several. Should I prioritize them? No. In fact, I want them moved to the bottom of the waiting list. Permanently. Janet paused. May I ask why? Let's just say I prefer tenants who respect boundaries. I understand. Anything else? I took a deep breath. I'd also like to review the building's operating procedures. Security protocols, visitor policies, that sort of thing. Certainly. Are you planning any changes? Possibly. I'll let you know. That afternoon, I drove to Camden Point and parked across from the Greystone. It was a beautiful spring day, and the building looked magnificent in the golden sunlight. Tenants came and went. A young woman in scrubs heading to her shift at the hospital, an older man walking a small dog, a couple carrying grocery bags and laughing about something one of them had said. These were good people living good lives. They paid their rent on time, took care of their homes, contributed to the community, and Marcus wanted to displace them for the crime of not being upscale enough. As I watched, a familiar car pulled up to the building's entrance. Marcus and Catherine climbed out, both dressed in their usual armor of expensive clothes and practiced confidence. They stood on the sidewalk, pointing at windows and discussing their renovation plans with the casual entitlement of colonizers surveying new territory. I rolled down my window to hear their conversation. The lobby definitely needs updating, Catherine was saying. All that dark wood is so dated. I'm thinking, white marble, maybe some contemporary art. And the courtyard, Marcus added. We could put in a fitness center, or maybe a co-working space, charge premium rents for the amenities. They circled the building like sharks, noting every detail, cataloging every potential improvement. They had no idea they were being watched by the person whose approval they needed, the person they'd never thought to consider. As they climbed back into their car, I made a decision that would have consequences I couldn't yet imagine. I called Marcus. Hey, it's Thea. I've been thinking about our conversation last night. Great. I was hoping you'd follow up. Are you ready to see the Camden Point project? Actually, I have a different idea. What if I told you I had access to inside information about the Greystone estate? Silence. Then, what kind of information? The kind that could save you months of waiting and thousands in legal fees. Thea, what are you talking about? I could hear the shift in his voice, from brotherly indulgence to genuine interest. It was remarkable how quickly family dynamics changed when money entered the conversation. I'd rather discuss it in person. Can you meet me tomorrow? Just you. No Catherine, no lawyers, no intermediaries. Where? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. How about the Greystone lobby? Say 3 o'clock? You can get us inside? Trust me. The next afternoon, I arrived at the Greystone 30 minutes early. Janet met me in the lobby, curious about my unusual request. You're sure you want to handle this personally? She asked. Very sure. And you want me to stay nearby? Within earshot, but not obviously present. This is a family matter. Janet nodded, though I could see questions in her eyes. She disappeared into the property office, leaving the lobby door ajar. Marcus arrived precisely on time, looking around the elegant space with obvious appreciation. He was dressed for success. Tailored suit, Italian shoes, the kind of confident bearing that opened doors and closed deals. Thea, this is incredible, he said, embracing me. How did you arrange this? I have my ways. We stood in the center of the lobby, surrounded by the warm wood paneling and soft lighting that Catherine wanted to rip out. Marcus turned in a slow circle, taking in every detail. It's even better than the photos, he murmured. The bones of this place are incredible. Tell me about your plans for it. He launched into an enthusiastic description of the renovations he and Catherine had envisioned. Gut the interiors, modernize everything, raise rents by 40%, transform the building into a luxury complex that would attract tech executives and finance professionals. The current tenants are a mixed bag, he said dismissively. Teachers, social workers, grad students, nice enough people but not our target demographic. What happens to them? Standard practice. We offer modest relocation assistance, maybe help them find comparable units in less desirable areas. Most people are reasonable when you explain the economics. Less desirable areas. Modest relocation assistance. He was talking about upending a dozen lives with the casual indifference of someone moving chess pieces. And if they're not reasonable? Marcus's expression hardened slightly. Then we explore our legal options. Lease violations, noise complaints, property damage claims. There are always ways to encourage voluntary departures. I see. The key is moving fast once we close, he continued. Strike while the tenants are still adjusting to new ownership, before they have time to organize or hire lawyers. Very efficient. It has to be. In real estate, hesitation costs money. I nodded thoughtfully. Marcus, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you remember when we were kids, and you'd build those elaborate Lego cities? You'd spend hours getting every detail perfect. He smiled, clearly puzzled by the change of subject. Yeah, I loved those sets. Why? Do you remember what you'd do when you finished building? He paused, the smile fading as understanding dawned. I'd knock them down. Start over. You'd destroy them, I corrected gently. Beautiful, complex structures that had taken hours to build. You'd smash them in minutes just to see if you could build something bigger. Thea, where are you going with this? I pulled the leather portfolio from my bag and handed him a manila folder. I want you to look at something. He opened the folder, and I watched his face change as he processed the documents inside. Property deed, tax records, bank statements, lease agreements. His name was nowhere to be found, but mine was on every page. I don't understand, he said slowly. The Greystone isn't for sale, Marcus. It never was. But the estate was settled 6 months ago. I inherited this building from our great-aunt Cordelia. The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. I could see him recalculating, trying to make sense of this new information. You own this place? I do. But you're broke. You were being evicted. I was. Things change. Marcus looked around the lobby with new eyes, seeing it not as a conquest but as a fortress with someone else's flag flying above the battlements. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to hear your plans for my tenants, my building, my life's work. Thea, I had no idea. That I was the owner? Of course not, because you never asked. You saw an opportunity to profit from someone else's misfortune, and you assumed I was too naive to understand what you were really doing. That's not fair, isn't it? You were going to displace a dozen families so you could charge tech bros $3,000 a month for the privilege of living in Camden Point. You called it business. I call it exactly what you used to do with your Lego cities. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood whenever he was caught in some minor transgression. Look, I know how this sounds, but it's not personal. It's just economics. Everything is personal, Marcus. Every business decision affects real people with real lives. Mrs. Chen in 4B has lived here for 8 years. She's a nurse at Camden General, working double shifts to support her mother's medical bills. Where exactly would you relocate her? I don't know, but there are other options. Mr. Rodriguez in 2A is a teacher at East Briar Elementary. He walks to work every morning, rain or shine, because he can't afford a car. Your comparable unit in a less desirable area would add 2 hours to his commute. Thea, please. The young couple in 3C just had a baby. They chose this building because it's safe, quiet, and close to the pediatrician's office. But they're not your target demographic, so they'd have to go. Each example hit him like a small slap, and I could see the discomfort growing in his eyes. These weren't abstract numbers on a spreadsheet anymore. They were people with names and stories and reasons for being here. I understand you're upset, he said carefully. But surely we can work something out. A partnership, maybe. I have experience, connections, capital for improvements. What improvements? The building is in excellent condition, fully occupied and generating substantial income. What exactly needs fixing? Well, modernization. Updates. Market positioning. You mean gentrification? The word hung between us like an accusation. Marcus flinched, but didn't deny it. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You want to take an affordable building in a desirable neighborhood and make it unaffordable. You want to price out teachers and nurses and social workers so you can attract people who won't think twice about paying 40% more for granite countertops and a gym they'll never use. That's how markets work, Thea. Supply and demand. That's how displacement works. There's a difference. Janet appeared in the office doorway, sensing the tension in the conversation. I caught her eye and nodded, my signal that everything was under control. Marcus, I said quietly, do you remember what you told me last Christmas, when I was struggling to find work? He shifted uncomfortably. I said a lot of things. You said I needed to learn responsibility, that I was too idealistic, too impractical for the real world. You said artists like me don't understand how business actually works. I was trying to help. You were trying to put me in my place, the same way you're trying to put my tenants in their place, the same way you've always treated people who don't fit your definition of valuable. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my work? Really asked, not just made polite conversation. When was the last time you considered that maybe I understand business perfectly well? I just have different priorities? Marcus looked around the lobby again, perhaps seeing it differently now. The warm wood that Catherine wanted to replace with cold marble. The comfortable seating where tenants sometimes stop to chat with neighbors. The community bulletin board covered with local events and shared resources. This is a business, I continued, a very successful one, but it's also a community. These people aren't just revenue streams. They're neighbors, colleagues, friends. They look out for each other. They create the kind of life that money can't buy. I didn't think about it that way. No, you didn't. Because thinking about it that way would make what you plan to do much harder. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of misunderstanding and missed connections. I could see him struggling, perhaps for the first time, to see beyond his own assumptions. What happens now? He asked finally. Now you go home to Catherine and explain that the gray stone isn't available. Not now, not ever, not at any price. And us? Our family? I considered the question carefully. That depends on whether you can learn to see me as something other than your impractical little sister who needs guidance. Thea, I never meant. I know you didn't. That's the problem. None of you ever mean to be dismissive or condescending. It just comes so naturally that you don't even notice you're doing it. Marcus looked genuinely stricken, and for a moment I felt sorry for him. But sympathy wouldn't change the fundamental dynamic between us. The assumption that his success made him wise and my struggles made me foolish. I should go, he said quietly. Yes, you should. He paused at the door, turning back with an expression I'd never seen before. Uncertainty, maybe. Or the beginning of respect. The building really is beautiful, Thea. Aunt Cordelia chose well. She did. After he left, I sat alone in the lobby for a long time, surrounded by the quiet sounds of a building at rest. Somewhere above me, Mrs. Chen was probably getting ready for her night shift at the hospital. Mr. Rodriguez might be grading papers, red pen moving across young minds' attempts to make sense of the world. The couple in 3C was likely feeding their baby, marveling at tiny fingers and the miracle of new life. This was what I owned now. Not just brick and mortar, but a collection of human stories, each one valuable and irreplaceable. Janet emerged from the office, her expression carefully neutral. Everything all right? Everything's perfect. Will there be any changes to our Waiting list procedures? I smiled. No changes necessary. That evening, I called my father. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying that familiar mixture of affection and subtle disapproval. "Thea, sweetheart. Marcus mentioned you two had an interesting conversation today. Did he tell you what we discussed?" He was rather vague. Something about a business opportunity that didn't work out. Something like that. Well, I'm sure there will be other opportunities. The important thing is that you're thinking practically now. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you remember Aunt Cordelia? He paused, surprised by the change of subject. Of course. She was my father's sister. Lovely woman, though quite eccentric. Why do you ask? What made her eccentric? Oh, she never married, lived alone in that big house, spent all her time with those paintings of hers. She was talented, I'll give her that, but she never seemed interested in practical concerns. Practical concerns. The same phrase he'd used to describe my own shortcomings. Did you know she owned rental property? Did she? I suppose it's possible. She had some money from grandfather's estate, though I never paid much attention to how she invested it. Never paid much attention. That summed up my family's relationship. With Aunt Cordelia, and with me, perfectly. Dad, what if I told you that being impractical and being unsuccessful aren't the same thing? I'm not sure I follow. What if someone could care about art and beauty and community and still be a savvy businesswoman? What if idealism and pragmatism could coexist? Well, I suppose that would be admirable, though quite rare. Rarer than you might think. I agreed. We said goodbye, and I knew he'd spend the evening puzzling over our conversation, trying to decode whatever point I'd been making. It would probably keep him awake. Good. Over the following weeks, I settled into my new life as a property owner. I met with Janet regularly, learning the intricacies of building management and tenant relations. I walked through the Greystone, introducing myself to residents and listening to their concerns. Mrs. Chen invited me for tea and showed me photos of her mother, a tiny woman with fierce eyes who'd emigrated from Taiwan with nothing but determination, and a recipe for dumplings that had become legendary in their neighborhood. Mr. Rodriguez asked if I'd be interested in displaying some of his students' artwork in the lobby, a rotating gallery that would give young artists their first taste of public exhibition. The couple in 3C, David and Maria, were exactly as I'd imagined them, exhausted new parents who lit up when they talked about their daughter Sophie. They worried about child-proofing their apartment, about finding good babysitters, about balancing work and parenthood in a city that never slowed down. These weren't just tenants. They were a community, bound together by the simple fact of sharing space and caring about each other's well-being. Marcus called twice in the first month, awkward conversations where he tried to find a way back to our old dynamic without acknowledging what had changed between us. I was polite but distant, waiting to see if he'd learned anything from our encounter in the lobby. "Catherine's still processing everything," he said during our second call. "She had her heart set on that building. I'm sure she'll find something else." The thing is, we'd already started making plans. Hired an architect, talked to contractors. It's frustrating to have everything fall through at the last minute. Fall through. As if my ownership of the building were some unexpected technicality, rather than the central fact that made their entire scheme impossible. That's the risk with real estate, I said. Sometimes properties aren't actually available. Right. Of course. He paused. "Thea, I want you to know I never meant any disrespect. To you or your tenants." "What did you mean?" "I meant business, profit, return on investment. And you don't see how those goals might conflict with treating people decently?" I'm starting. 2. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get, and perhaps the closest thing to wisdom Marcus had ever offered. I decided to take it as progress, The real test came 6 weeks later, when Vivian called with an invitation to Easter dinner. "It's been too long since we've all been together," she said, in that carefully modulated tone that suggested obligation rather than genuine desire for my company. "Marcus mentioned you've been exploring some new business ventures." Something like that. "Wonderful. We're all so proud of you for finally taking a practical approach to your career." Finally. The word stung exactly as she'd intended it to. "I'll be there," I said. "Lovely. Oh, and Thea, do try to dress appropriately. You know how your father appreciates it when we all make an effort." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me had changed over the past 2 months. There was something different in her eyes, a confidence that hadn't been there before, a quiet strength that came from finally understanding her own worth. Easter Sunday arrived, gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made expensive houses feel even more fortress-like. I pulled into the circular driveway of my father's Millbrook Heights estate, noting the familiar collection of luxury cars that marked family gatherings. Marcus's BMW, Catherine's Mercedes, Vivian's pristine Range Rover. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a navy dress that was elegant without being flashy, paired with the pearl earrings Aunt Cordelia had left me. Professional but not intimidating, successful but not threatening. The perfect camouflage for what I had planned. Vivian greeted me at the door with her usual air kisses and brittle smile. "Thea, darling, you look lovely. How are you settling into your new place?" "Very well, thank you." "I'm so glad. There's nothing like stability to help one focus on what really matters." We joined the others in the living room, where the conversation was already flowing around safe topics. The weather, upcoming vacation plans, the latest scandal at the country club. I accepted a glass of wine and settled into my usual spot, observing the familiar dynamics play out. Catherine was holding court with a story about their recent house hunting expedition, describing various properties with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never doubted her ability to afford whatever she wanted. Marcus nodded along, occasionally adding details about square footage and property taxes. "We're being very selective," Catherine was saying. "After the disappointment with that Camden Point building, we've decided to focus on properties with more potential for customization." "What happened with Camden Point?" my father asked. Marcus and Catherine exchanged a glance, and I saw something pass between them. Embarrassment, perhaps, or simply the awkwardness of having to explain a failure. "The property wasn't actually available," Marcus said carefully. "The ownership situation was more complicated than we initially understood." "How frustrating," Vivian murmured. "I hate it when sellers aren't straightforward about their intentions." "Actually," I said quietly, "the seller was perfectly straightforward. The property simply wasn't for sale." The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at me, perhaps surprised that I'd spoken up about something outside my usual areas of expertise. "But Marcus said there were estate issues," Catherine pressed. "Multiple heirs, legal complications." There were no complications. The inheritance was settled exactly as intended. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Thea, I don't think—" "The building went to a single heir, as specified in the will, someone who had no intention of selling." "How do you know all this?" my father asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. I set down my wine glass and looked around. The room at the faces of my family. People who'd known me my entire life, but had never really seen me. Because I'm the heir. The silence that followed was profound. I could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantel, the distant sound of rain against the windows, the soft hiss of the gas fireplace that provided warmth without the inconvenience of actual fire. "I'm sorry?" Vivian's voice was carefully controlled, but I caught the slight tremor beneath the polish. "Aunt Cordelia left me the Greystone Apartments, 12 units in Camden Point, fully occupied, generating substantial monthly income. I've owned it since March." Catherine's mouth opened and closed, soundlessly. Marcus looked like he'd been struck by something heavy and unexpected. My father simply stared, processing this information with the methodical care of a man accustomed to financial surprises. "But you were being evicted," Vivian said finally. "You had no money, no prospects. I was being evicted from my old apartment, while I owned a building worth over $2 million. Ironic, isn't it?" $2 million, my father repeated, his businessman's mind immediately latching onto the number. Conservative estimate. The property generates roughly $30,000 in monthly rental income, with minimal overhead and excellent growth potential. I could see them all recalculating, their mental images of me shifting like sand in an earthquake. Poor, struggling Thea was suddenly wealthy, successful Thea, and they had no framework for processing the change. "Why didn't you tell us?" Marcus asked. "Because I wanted to see what you'd do. How you'd treat me, how you'd talk about the property, how you'd handle the situation." "And?" Catherine's voice was sharp with defensive anger. "You planned to evict my tenants so you could double their rents. You talked about families with children and elderly residents as if they were obstacles to profit rather than human beings with legitimate claims to their homes." "That's business," Marcus started. "That's what you keep saying. But it's not just business when it affects real people's lives. Mrs. Chen has lived in that building for 8 years. Mr. Rodriguez walks to work every morning because the location makes it possible. The young couple with the new baby chose their apartment because it felt safe and welcoming." "How do you know all this?" Vivian asked. "Because I took the time to meet them, to learn their names, hear their stories, understand what the building means to them, because I treated them like people instead of line items on a profit sheet." The room fell silent again. I could see my family struggling to reconcile this new information with their long-held assumptions about my character and capabilities. $30,000 a month, my father said slowly. "That's substantial." "It is. And you've been managing this yourself?" "With the help of an excellent property management company, yes." He nodded, perhaps beginning to see me through a different lens. "That's quite an accomplishment, sweetheart." "Sweetheart." The endearment carried more respect than it had in years. "Thank you." Catherine was less gracious. "You let us humiliate ourselves," she said, her voice tight with anger. "You sat there while we talked about buying your building, displacing your tenants, and you said nothing." "I said plenty. I asked what would happen to the existing residents. I questioned your plans for relocation assistance. I wondered if you'd considered the human cost of your renovations. You knew we didn't have the full picture. You had exactly the picture you chose to see. A building full of inconvenient people who weren't wealthy enough to matter." "That's not fair," Marcus protested. "Isn't it? You called them transient. You said they needed to learn that sentiment can't interfere with profit margins. You talked about using legal pressure to force them out if they didn't go voluntarily." Each word hit like a small hammer, and I could see the impact in their faces. These weren't abstract business concepts anymore. They were plans that would have destroyed the community I'd come to know and value. "We didn't know they were your tenants," Catherine said weakly. "Would that have mattered? If they belonged to someone else, would their displacement have been more acceptable?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Vivian cleared her throat delicately. "Well, this is certainly unexpected. I suppose congratulations are in order." "Are they?" "Of course, darling. We're all thrilled by your success." Thrilled. The word felt hollow, empty of genuine emotion. They were shocked, perhaps, confused, certainly, but thrilled seemed unlikely. "Are you?" I pressed. "Because 2 months ago you told this entire family that I needed to learn responsibility, that bailing me out constantly wouldn't help me grow up. You made it clear that my struggles were character flaws rather than circumstances. I was trying to help. You were trying to shame me into conforming to your definition of success. The same way Marcus tried to shame me into abandoning my artistic pursuits for something more practical." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Thea, that's not entirely fair. We all want what's best for you. Do you? Because what would have been best for me was your support during a difficult time, your faith in my abilities, your recognition that I might have resources and strategies you couldn't see. How could we have known about the inheritance? Marcus asked. You couldn't. But you could have known me. You could have asked how I was really doing instead of assuming I was failing. You could have offered help instead of judgment. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of accumulated misunderstanding. I could see them all struggling with the implications of what I'd revealed, not just the financial details, but the deeper questions about how they'd treated me and why. I think, my father said carefully, that we may have underestimated you. You did, all of you, for years. What do you want from us now? Catherine asked, her anger giving way to something that might have been fear. It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself for weeks. What did I want? An apology? Public acknowledgement of their mistakes? Some grand gesture of contrition? I want you to see me, I said simply, not as your impractical little sister or your disappointing stepdaughter, but as someone who might have valuable insights and legitimate perspectives. Someone whose choices might be different from yours without being wrong. We do see you, Vivian started. No, you don't. You see your idea of me, filtered through your assumptions about what success looks like and who deserves respect. You've never asked about my work, my goals, my vision for the future. You've never considered that maybe I understand business perfectly well. I just have different priorities. Marcus leaned forward, his expression more serious than I'd seen in years. What are your priorities? Finally. The question I'd been waiting for someone in my family to ask. Creating value that goes beyond profit margins. Building communities instead of just accumulating assets. Using success as a platform for helping others, rather than just helping myself. That's very idealistic, Catherine said, though with less disdain than usual. It's also very practical. Happy tenants stay longer, pay rent on time, and take care of the property. A stable community attracts quality residents and maintains property values. Treating people well isn't just morally right, it's good business. My father nodded slowly. That's actually quite sophisticated thinking. Thank you. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of revelations settling around us like dust after an earthquake. I could see them all processing, recalibrating, trying to figure out how to relate to this new version of me. Finally, Vivian spoke. I suppose we owe you an apology. Do you? We've been unfairly dismissive of your choices, your capabilities. It wasn't much of an apology, but it was more than I'd expected from her. I decided to accept it as a starting point. I appreciate that. What happens now? Marcus asked. Now we see if you can learn to treat me as your equal instead of your charity case. And if we can't? I considered the question carefully. Then I suppose we'll continue to be polite strangers who share holiday meals and family obligations. And if we can? Then maybe we can be something better. Maybe we can be actual family. The conversation moved on to other topics after that, safer ground where everyone knew their roles. But something had shifted in the room's atmosphere, a subtle recalibration of power and respect that would take time to fully settle. As the evening wound down, my father walked me to the door. His hand on my shoulder felt different now, less patronizing, more genuinely affectionate. I'm proud of you, Thea, not just for the financial success, but for how you've handled it, with dignity and purpose. Thank you. I hope you'll be patient with us. It may take some time to adjust our thinking. I have time, and I hope you'll consider sharing more about your plans. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on property management, community development. You've clearly developed some expertise. My thoughts. My expertise. words he'd never used in reference to me before. I'd like that. Driving home through the quiet streets of East Briar, I reflected on the evening's revelations. It hadn't been the dramatic confrontation I'd sometimes imagined. No shouting, no storming out, no theatrical gestures. Just the slow, steady erosion of old assumptions and the careful construction of new understanding. Change, I was learning, was often quieter than expected. The following week brought unexpected developments. Marcus called on Tuesday, his voice carrying a tentative quality I'd never heard before. "Thea, I've been thinking about our conversation on Easter, about the Greystone, about the tenants." "Yes?" "I wondered if you might be willing to show me around. Not as a potential buyer," he added quickly, "but as someone who wants to understand what you've built there." It was a small gesture, but significant. I agreed to meet him the following Saturday. He arrived at the Greystone carrying coffee and pastries from the bakery down the street. A peace offering, perhaps, or simply an acknowledgement that this was my territory now. "Thank you for agreeing to this," he said as we stood in the lobby. "Thank you for asking." I led him through the building, introducing him to the residents who were home. Mrs. Chen invited us both for tea, charming Marcus with stories about her nursing career and her mother's legendary dumpling recipe. Mr. Rodriguez showed us the student artwork that now decorated the lobby walls, colorful, enthusiastic pieces that brought life and energy to the elegant space. "They're remarkable," Marcus said as we climbed to the upper floors. "Your tenants, I mean. I hadn't expected..."